And here to tell his Korean-American story is Eric Kim.
It's taken me a long time to see the version of me you see up here, or the one you're awarding a Korean-American Trailblazer. I was trying to come up with what exactly I wanted to say with this opportunity, a room full of Korean-Americans. It's very juicy. I could say whatever I want for 5 minutes, that's great. But I wanted to tell the story of how I arrived here. I think some of you might know me from the New York Times. Maybe you've read my columns or you've seen my videos, made my recipes. Maybe you've made the gochujang caramel cookies. I wanted to tell this story of how I became me because it wasn't easy. This version of me took time, and I think that's because blazing a trail takes time. I don't mean to come up here and say that yes, this is exactly how I blazed the trail. That's not how it happened. It just, when I was met with each obstacle, I had to find another way because the road in front of me was blocked off. And so I'm gonna kind of tell you guys the version of how I got here. Grew up in Atlanta. Growing up in Atlanta meant you really did have a chance of becoming famous. So I grew up around a lot of people who wanted to be famous. And as a kid, I remember hearing stories about famous people like Usher and Michael Jackson buying homes just 5 minutes from where my cousins and I lived, which at the time seemed like Hicksville, Georgia. Why would they want to live here, we thought. Now as an adult, I can understand that though we lived near farms and forests as children, those spaces would eventually become country clubs and steakhouses, a sign of new money multiplying in one of the 4 oldest states in the US. It was also because of all the parents who were a lot like everyone in this room. When I asked my father, Key, why he chose Atlanta as his destination city, immigrating from South Korea, he said, because Julia Roberts is from here. I spent a lot of my career as a food writer telling my mother's story because she taught me how to cook. But I never had the chance to credit, the other parent who made me who I am. So I just wanted to talk about him a little bit because I never get to. My father, Key, was a businessman who peddled cell phones and cell phone accessories to all the Korean Americans in the metro Atlanta area. He was always interested in telecommunication. He used to be a beeper guy. He was always popular, the center of attention in any room. This likability gave him a reliable salary, something with which he could, years later, send his 2 boys to college and take his family on the occasional vacation. All stuff we took for granted until we got older and learned how hard it is to make money. With my dad as a model, I think I knew from a young age that good marketing leads to popularity. And with popularity comes soft power. A free dish at a restaurant, special treatment at the golf range, lifelong customers and fans, but also a responsibility to influence. Whenever I stepped into a Korean business on Buford Highway, all I had to say was, I'm Key's son, and they'd hand me a free ice cream. It only makes sense that I would follow in his footsteps. So 15 years ago, I moved to New York City to become a pop star. Like any Korean American from Atlanta, Georgia. But I was trying to be like the next Michelle Branch or like the next John Mayer. It was that time when you could become famous for writing your own songs and singing. And I have to say that I had so much fun in New York City those first few years. I recorded a demo. It was an EP. And I would use that to book rock clubs in Manhattan, like Arlene's Grocery, Sidewalk Cafe, Pianos, throughout my college days. And my freshman year dorm was right on the east edge of Washington Square Park, which made it easy to write music and play shows by night while cramming for exams, attending classes and interning at publishing houses and food media companies by day. The stage would become a comfort to me then, throughout my 20s, as I stumbled from career to career, trying to find my way. And nothing would remind me of the fire inside me like playing a quick set at the bitter end, holding a room's attention for a full 45 minutes, or in this case, 5 minutes, making them laugh and cry and laugh again. I think I think once I decided to go into another field, and then another field, and another field, after failing at each one, I found food writing. After I had properly left behind my pop star career in the rearview mirror, I found myself one day featured in the New York Times food section. I was 27 years old, writing a column for a food blog at the time about cooking for one. A photographer came to my apartment to take my picture for a story that the reporter Tejal Rao had written about me and a couple of other people who were promoting small-scale cooking. So really random, right? When the story published, and this is kind of the part I wanted to tell, it's sort of the darker underbelly of all this. When the story published, my editor at the food blog said to me, "Ooh, Mr. Famous." And for some reason, the way she said it, it wasn't a compliment. In 2021, when my first New York Times story went up, it was a short piece on kimchi, muchims. Another Korean-American journalist wrote to the editor that I had gotten all my facts wrong and that the piece was an abomination. Luckily, my editors were on my side. They called to confirm that this was just an attempted hit at my reputation, but we combed through the piece line by line anyway to triple-check all the facts and the phrasing of each line to make sure nothing was misconstrued or worse, inaccurate. In the end, there were no corrections to be made. The journalists just didn't like that they hadn't written the piece themselves, so they lashed out in fear. Or at least that's my version of the story. I spent the next 5 years on this job in fear, and it's taken a really long time and a lot of therapy to kind of understand that journalist's mindset and this thing that I was starting to experience, which was a lot of support from the Korean American community, but also a lot of hate. It comes with the territory. I wanted to tell this story because I went from celebrating one of the biggest wins of my journalism career to feeling mortified. That week, I hopped on a teleconference call with my chef friend and Nuna, Esther Choi. She was the 2022 Trailblazer, to confide in her and to seek advice about this new strange flavor of hate that I was experiencing for the first time, and that she, as a Korean American chef, was also familiar with. The flavor is this: when you cook or write about Korean food for a majority audience, it's not the white people who come for you, it's your own community. If you ever hear someone say, "I'm Korean and that's not Korean," then run the other direction. So I've spent many years studying and psychoanalyzing people like this, often other Korean Americans, and for years it debilitated me because I didn't understand them. But also I just have to emphasize that obviously that's like a small portion of the majority. But as a young journalist kind of entering the public eye for the first time, it really kind of destroyed me. And my mental health suffered greatly for the next few years, and it's taken a lot of therapy to kind of put the pieces back together. But doing the piecing back together is part of the story that I think makes me especially who I am and makes me especially equipped to do this job, to write about Korean food, because I'm also a failed English PhD, and I'm a failed poet, and I'm a failed pop star. Failed songwriter. What all those things have in common, though, is they're writing, and I've always been a writer. I've always loved writing, and I studied literature, history. I've studied how to use language to tell a story and how to not just tell the story, but how to convince people, how to draw empathy. I think those are the skills I knew that made me equipped to be the first Korean American staff columnist on the food desk at the New York Times. And yeah, we're gonna go into the positive stuff real quick. But I guess my point with this is that, sometimes you end up in a situation, you accidentally blaze a trail maybe. You're like, oops, you light a fire and then it kind of like goes away. And then you have to like, oh, that's a good path, and then you go down it. And it leads to really good things. I found myself with a huge audience suddenly, and all these skills. I had these skills. I could translate Korean food for a majority audience, but I could also represent. Representation is a very complicated word for our community. Whether I wanted it or not, I became a taepyo for Korean food, right? Representative. And I think with that, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed being like a little academic on the food desk, and I had this job where I could tell stories and teach not just Korean people about our own history and our own food, but also and how to cook it, which is a big deal, but also the rest of the world. And I've been publishing recipes with New York Times Cooking for 5 years now, and my main goal with each Korean recipe was to create a public record of a popular dish as a resource for non-Koreans to learn about it, and to develop my own version of it, usually with a small twist, to remind both Koreans and non-Koreans that there are many ways to cook a single Korean dish, and there's no one way to cook anything, especially Korean food. And I knew that early on that was the only way for Korean chefs to be able to, and Korean food writers and Korean artists to be able to expand and create new art and to be themselves. And I think that's an important message for any young artist, to sort of be yourself and to make sure when you're going down an artistic path especially, to make sure you just really focus on being yourself and telling as specific of a story as possible, because that's what's going to resonate the most with people. I think I'll end with, it was really hurtful. It was hard to deal with all the hate comments about these recipes I would publish, and it's just food, but it's kind of like writing a homework assignment and then getting it chewed up and eaten up by the public every time. And it also brought out a lot of self-hate and all of the insecurities that I always had inside me. And there's a common story you hear with anyone who ends up in the public eye, but I think I want to tell the story of how overcoming that and really looking to people who support you and people who celebrate you. Thank you, everyone here. I think that's something that helped me to really step into my power, and that's when I was able to understand what my calling was, which was to write. And with that, I'll just, I think that's my speech. Yeah.